Hello everyone, it's Dr. Rafael Gutierrez. Welcome to my channel. As you can see, today I'm actually wearing my gi. Oh, damn. And the reason is I actually came across a couple things about the gi that I thought were pretty interesting. And there's a lot of discussions that happen about the karate uniform. Now, you did hear me say gi, and there's a lot of people who say, oh, you shouldn't call it a gi. You should call it a kyogi or a karate gi or a do gi or 100 different names. And one of the things with the karate-gi or do-gi or the kyogi is there's a lot of mysticism put to it, especially here in the U.S. I have noticed that when I go to Okinawa, they don't put that much to it. What I mean is, I will actually see people who train and their gis are old. They actually will have tears like mine here in their sleeves. And what it's used for is it's a pretty much a uniform that's used for training. And it has a lot of benefits for training if you look at it not as a uniform that has to be kept clean and pristine, but as something that you can actually use for safety, for pretty much seeing how the body moves based on the lines. I did a huge video on this already. But a lot of times here in the US, you have people who actually come out with these interesting ideas. Some of these ideas may have come from certain areas, and what I usually tell people is that when you are coming across what and how things are used, there's two things you should look at. One of them is history, and the other is the science behind it, the biology, the anatomy, the physiology, the physics. Because only by looking at this can we actually see what makes rational sense. Now, if we deal with history of the kyogi, and in the U.S., gi is appropriate because we're speaking in English. But if you're actually, and in Okinawa, by the way, I've heard a lot of people refer to it as gi as well. If we actually look at the karate uniform as it applies to karate, it really doesn't become a big thing until about 1930s, 1940s, when Funakoshi goes to mainland Japan, Tokyo in particular, and is given a judo gi by Kano sensei to have him do a demonstration in karate. Before then, if you actually look at the old pictures of karateka, they're not wearing this uniform. Usually they're wearing loincloths, and there was a gentleman who actually made a joke about this, that every time his teacher used to see someone say traditional karate attire required, he said, I guess we're showing up in our underwear. Because that's how people used to train. And not just in Okinawa, if you look at some of the old methods of karate training, you'll notice that it's not done in a gi. Ours doesn't really come into play until pretty much Funakoshi goes to Tokyo in about 1930s, 1940s. And so a lot of the spiritual aspects that people put to the gi don't really apply to it as a karate training equipment. And we actually look at the name that a lot of people do use for it. Kyogi pretty much means workout or exercise uniform. So it's like if a wrestler is using a uniform for wrestling. It's a wrestling uniform. There's nothing sacred about it. It's something that he uses for his sport. Now, if we go past it, if we go to judo, judo pretty much is born with Kano, and Kano does introduce the judo gi, the gi that actually comes to Okinawa. And there really isn't something that tells us that he felt it was something sacred. One of the things you notice is that with judo, you actually have the gi sometimes made with different colors. For the Olympics, you actually can see the blue and white. And you can actually see the old gis weren't all white either. They actually had certain patterns, certain stitching. And these things changed throughout time. Again, this tells you something. Wasn't a sacred thing necessarily in judo. I could be wrong in judo, but at least with karate, I can say there was nothing sacred in it. It was something that was used there. But judo actually came from older martial arts. And if we actually look at the older martial arts, they do not use traditionally the kyogi. If we look at the old martial arts, the oldest martial arts we can find in Japan, I would say you look at sumo. And what you notice in sumo is they're not using a kyogi in there. And sumo does have religious roots to it. There are actually a lot of the ceremonies in sumo which actually have religious origins to it. And one of the things you'll notice in sumo is what they wear. It's not the kyogi. It is actually the uniform you watch people use when they are actually doing judo. And if you look at the old text of jiu-jitsu, you will see that that's actually what they show people using to work out. Reason is clothes are usually expensive. Clothes were relatively expensive. And so people would actually not necessarily want to use something that was expensive, especially if you think of older times when cotton was actually expensive, hard to get to. So you may actually use hemp, would have been a little cheaper, but still not something that was routinely used. Silk, extremely expensive. And so this whole idea of the karate uniform being something mystical from a long time ago, well, it doesn't seem to add up when we look at the history of the arts and we look at the actually the oldest martial art that we can actually follow in Japan, which would be sumo. They're not using this. They're using something that was traditionally used in martial arts. Pretty much, you'll see it. And so a lot of times people will actually say, well, where does this idea come from? And I want you to think of something like advertisement. This is where I do believe most of the legends and ideas of that people use in martial arts come from. I want you to think of yourself as a parent, and you see 20, 30, 100 kids on stage, all of them with their crisp, clean, white, sparkling uniforms, and they're going through their kata all at once, all together, all like a military drill. And you think, hey, wouldn't it be great to have my child doing that as part of the group? They would have the nice, clean uniforms that they could actually do all these exercises in. And at that point, when people start looking at it as a prop for marketing, the whole meaning of the gi ends up changing. The whole meaning of the kyogi would end up changing. And it becomes something that, oh, it should be pristine and white and never torn. And it doesn't make sense, because what the kyoge actually means is exercise material. It's what you use so you don't destroy your good clothes. And like I said, if you use physics, anatomy, you can see how you can actually use it as a practice clothes and to avoid injuries. Like I said, I made a video on that. You can actually look for it if you want, or ask and I'll put it in. But that's one of the big things that happens is we do have to, when we actually hear certain things that don't seem to make that much sense, we do have to actually look at the history. Now with that, I will tell you, I for one love my students to have gis that are well used. What I mean by that is I sometimes have them go to the beach and train, sometimes go to the park and train. And I want them to use the gi because that way it stains, it gets dirty, and they preserve their clothes. It's nice for the parents because, hey, you know, a gi, as long as if it's stained and you can exercise with it, that's fine. It's exercise equipment. Their good clothes can be saved for church, school, parties, whatever they need. Now, interesting thing that I've actually noticed is a lot of times people talk about, oh, wasn't martial arts better in the past? And I actually am one of these firm believers that nothing was better in the past. There were probably better fighters because they had to be, but training methods, things that we have, actually are improving over time because we have knowledge. One of the things I actually tell people is today we have baseball pitchers who are actually still in their professional levels well into their 40s. When I was a kid, if you saw a pitcher in their 30s, it was like, wow, how did this guy survive so long? With kinesiology, we see these actually things change. And as we look at history, we can see how with new information, things can actually become better. And the nice thing is we can actually use this with what we see in the past. A lot of times people, oh, the gi is something sacred that was in karate for thousands of years, and you know, it was always done like this. Well, we can go to the history, by the way, and look at the pictures of the old masters and see what they wore. And we can actually read the stories of the old masters and see what they actually talked about in their gis and why they wanted to use one and why they didn't. And we can also look at other styles. For instance, if you look at some of the people who do Wichiru, even sometimes Goju-ryu, they'll do karate without their gi top and without their shirt, so the instructor can see the musculature and other aspects which they can talk about. And so with this, we can actually have a really great idea of what's going on. And what I found really amazing is how many people are actually trying to use pretty much scientific method and experimentation in their martial arts. Recently, I saw one video, which if you want, ask me and I'll tell you who it was. But it was a gentleman from Japan who was trying to see if the ki helped his punch, if when he put his ki helped, and how the intent did. He pretty much went to an arcade where you actually had a machine that measured force. And it was great. Did I agree with everything? Obviously not. There's always something that goes off. And that's actually something good with what they call the peer-reviewed system. The peer-reviewed system pretty much in research is about, okay, someone does something. We're going to see what they do and then see if it could be recreated by someone else. Were there any errors made for this? And it doesn't matter if they got the right answer or not, because if the ideas with these experimentations is it furthers our total knowledge. We can actually see what they did, try to copy it, and see if it actually gives us the same results. There's another gentleman who I actually watched who pretty much mentions you have to try everything out to see if it works. And that's why MMA is such an important branch of martial arts. In MMA, it either works or it doesn't work, or it's illegal. And over there, you can't lie about it. If you do a tournament, especially in karate, you don't know, oh, well, did that punch connect, or would it have connected, or would something else happen? No. It's someone says, that's where it was. In things like MMA, in judo, you actually can see if these techniques work. Yes, there are rules. People actually go into that all the time, but you can see if these techniques work in certain areas. I will actually say that MMA gives us another aspect of the scientific method, and that is what actually caused injuries in MMA. Now, I'm not someone who likes to see people injured, but if someone is in an MMA fight and they have an injury that ends a fight at that moment, that's a technique that I think for martial arts, for understanding what should happen, is something you want to look at. Sport injuries are the same thing. If you see an injury in sport, you can actually try to recreate it by modeling and see if that's actually a technique that could actually be used in your martial arts. And it's interesting. As I was actually talking about history and science and looking at the past to try to determine what would work better in the future, I actually remember something that has actually happened something that happens a lot in the past, and that's military coups. And I know it doesn't seem to have much to do with karate, but let me explain and let me see what you think. Now, one of the first coups that I actually remember thinking about is Napoleon Bonaparte and the new French government. Napoleon Bonaparte was put as the head of the military. And in, 1799, 1800, he ended up pretty much coming in and decided to make himself emperor. And as he had control of the military, he was emperor. And this actually has happened a lot of different times. In Greece, there was actually a bunch of colonels who decided they didn't like the king, and so they pretty much said, well, goodbye. We don't want you here anymore. They took over. The king of Greece pretty much ended up becoming a commoner. There was obviously the failed one, which I actually was thinking about because of something that recently happened. Many of you probably have heard of the beer hall revolt, or I think they call it the beer hall putsch, where it was a failed coup, where what happened is pretty much it was the first attempt of the Nazis of taking over Germany. It failed because they didn't get control of the military. It would have actually, World War II would have happened probably a lot sooner if that would have happened. Just history. And we actually see this a lot. There's actually the of military actually being able to take over really easy. Chile is actually one that comes up. to mind. In Chile, Pinochet, was it 73, I think? He pretty much was made the head of the military. And then he pretty much told the government, well, I'm the president now. President for life, of course. And he pretty much just ended up taking over. Very much nobody was able to stop him. Actually, if you go a little farther back, close to World War II, we can look at Franco. And Franco, again, he actually worked his way up to the military. And once he had power, he pretty much took over and became, again, president for life. More recently, you may have actually read about the Myanmar, how the generals pretty much took over. Interesting thing that I actually found is a lot of times coups actually happen historically when the person in charge does something that irritates a lot of people, irritates the locals. And one of the generals, one of the people with control of their military, decides, hey, you know what? This is a perfect opportunity for me to take over. And the reason I'm actually mentioning this is I was actually just flipping through different news sites and ended up coming across something where the leader of the Wagner Group pretty much is trying to confront Putin into giving him control of the rest of the military. Now remember, the Wagner Group is a private military he controls, and he has a lot of money. He ends up getting diamonds from areas in Africa, so he has a lot of money. They're actually the better funded military in Russia. And what's really interesting is he's now asking for control of the military, which the military, if you have actually read some stuff, you'll notice that most of the conscripts are not too happy right now. So I don't know if the head of the Wagner Group is a big fan of history. If I remember correctly, he is a big fan of the pretty much the Nazi regimes in World War II. So he may have actually read about the beer hall revolt and realized that if he has control of both his Wagner Group and the military, it would be real easy to pretty much cause a coup and take over. I don't know, it might just be me talking, and may actually just be, hey, you know, you can see coincidences in certain things. You can see that a military group is getting stronger, and it just may be that. But I really think it's kind of interesting that a private military is getting stronger than the actual military. And again, if you actually go to even as far back as Rome, you see that when mercenary groups get stronger than the regular military, coups and overthrowing of governments become something relatively easy. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave a comment, tell me what you think, and if you'd like to share it, feel free. And if anyone asks me who the people are who I was saying, yeah, this is really great what they do, I will add the video on the comment section. Hope you enjoy this and have a nice day.